Oh, yeah, hit the button. Making a video. I think I'll respond to this Hotla Day video. And the kind of odds made a few, but it's all jibber jabber. His last one basically saying if Hitler was evil, then he was right. Some kind of nonsense like that. So somehow, because it's more semantic stuff. If you call somebody evil, like they're the evil, and it's their whatever they do is some sort of expression of their evil, rather than just saying they're evil because of what they did. But yeah, it's just how you play with your perception of the bad doing. But it's idiotic to say what's the difference where the bad doing comes from. Ignorance, stupidity, psychological impulse. It doesn't matter. I mean, the lack of restraint or the desire that's unrestrained. It doesn't really matter. It's obviously a combination of two things. Stupid desires and not enough brains not to act on them. Right? I mean, there really isn't that much point in analyzing it any further than that, just to say you either are too stupid for not recognizing that your psychological impulses were idiotic and bigoted, or your psychological impulses are insanely irrational and rabid, sick, and you suck. Yeah, and yes, you should die in the war. I don't know. It seems to me the answer was solved. I mean, the problem was solved. Yes, you killed the bad guy, and now there's no Hitler. It's not complicated. I mean, now we got a Muslim problem, but we don't have a Hitler problem. Well, anyway, this guy's he's just an asshole. Never mind. Stupid. Stupid. This guy ain't too bright either.
Questions for inmendham video. Watched this video on furnace, and a request or a piece of advice.
Yeah, whatever. Screw that. The sound quality's a little crappy, but well, can't fix it now.
And I appreciate it's a walk and talk video, so one expects this to a degree, but it'd be useful because whether he could, it's like one of those lectures where you think you're taking it in, and you walk out and you wonder what you've learned.
Yeah, whatever. So this is just right. This is just plainly useless critiquing of the video, which I thought was perfectly adequate to its purposes. So yeah, I'm going to refute any argument he's going to make, saying there was something missing in the content, or that it was unsubstantive, that it was a meal that left you hungry. He's sort of implying. I say that's absolute nonsense, and if he has the balls to play the video, he'll have no argument to be able to make that argument. He'll have no evidence to make that argument out of. So I'd say it's a pile of shit. So this is just part of his obnoxious. You want to critique? I'll give you some advice. This is no way to make a video. Yeah, it's a waste of my time.
So I guess it's useful. The old public speaking bit of advice, and occasionally I try to adopt it, where they say, first say what you're going to say, then say what you're going to say, and then tell them what you've said.
Yeah, so now if you watch the video, it couldn't have been any more glaring that I did exactly that. I started off on the video saying, well, look, there's basically two kinds of ways to evaluate this ethical thing and this raw value thing. And I pointed out that on both of these accounts, I think an argument can be made that life fails. Okay, its origins, its nature, its function, need machine, doesn't satisfy any needs in the universe kind of thing, yeah, it's fail. And then this idea that you don't have this consent thing, that you're playing a game where the game is being played not with your own life, but often with this idea of people who procreate. They're doing this aggressive action. They're going to Vegas with somebody else's welfare. I mean, there's no other analogy for it. That's what it is. You're risk-taking with somebody else's welfare. There's no other way to look at it. And you're doing it without consent. And under that circumstance, as I pointed out in previous videos, I didn't point out in that particular video. I pointed out how it fails not to have consent. But obviously fails because you're assigning a jeopardy, not to yourself, but to somebody else. And that if you're going to do that, you have to have 100% confidence or 99% confidence. You have to be really, really, really confident that what you're doing is ethically or that it is functionally justified. That you're certain the torture you're going to impose is worth it. That the worst case scenario is acceptable. It's acceptable. You're accepting the risk. It means you have to say that it's okay if disaster happens. And I don't think anybody can rationally say it's okay. So anyway, the video did spell that out. So, fuck you, you're an asshole. I mean, this is just such a bullshit critique. Like I said, I have the balls to play the video and point out how I didn't do exactly that. I prefaced the video, explained I'm going to talk about two subjects, talked about the two subjects, and then finished the video by pointing out, in the last minute of the video, I was pointing out how, last 2 minutes anyway, how, yes, it fails on both of those accounts. Couldn't have been clearer.
That is, I guess, summarize. Because I'm not sure what inmendham's discussed or added beyond what I already understand by his conceptions of fairness. There are many.
Again, yes, there's, I can't add anything because it's not that complicated an argument. The consent argument's pretty obvious, it's overtly right in your face. I mean, the fact is you can't guarantee the results. You are taking a risk and you're doing it with somebody else's welfare. I guess that means if you don't have consent, you have to have certainty. And you don't have either one. You don't have certainty of the outcome, and you certainly don't have certain knowledge that the negative outcome is worth it. So therefore, you're not in ethically tenable ground. So that argument's done. I've made the argument. You haven't refuted the argument. You haven't come back with a single thing but saying something like, well, in nature, in evolution, we can't get consent. Well, so what? The fact that I've said it before, I'll say it again. The fact that you can't get consent doesn't mean the need to get consent went away. Doesn't mean the obligation to have consent goes away. It means that the standard for your conduct goes higher. If you can't get consent, again, if I don't have consent to steal my neighbor's money and gamble it for him in Las Vegas, the only way I could justify doing that rationally is I'd have to be 100% certain I had a gimmick and it was a sure thing I was betting on. I'd have to be certain to justify doing it. Now, again, where's your counter-argument to that solid piece of logic? There's no counter-argument from you except nature doesn't work. Well, nature doesn't work that way doesn't mean I have no obligation to logically analyze it and say nature fails then. Nature fails as an ethical guidepost. It fails.
Bits in there which I had a tendency to agree with in the sense that I share a moral intuition about...
Well, see, you share a moral intuition. Where in the fucking Christ did I ever talk about any kind of thing called a moral intuition? I've said exactly the opposite. So here we go again. You're assuming something. You say you understand the argument, and yet you would slander me by saying I'd ever say anything like there's such a thing as a moral intuition. What a crock of absolute shit. There's no such thing as intuition, in my opinion, of any value whatsoever. Intuition is bigotry. Intuition is nonsense. Intuition is the thing that gets in our logical way. It doesn't do us any good at all. Thinking is good. Okay, reacting intuitionally is bad. Okay, so right there, what is this shit? We share intuition? No, we don't share that. I have knowledge of suffering through personal experience. That personal experience has informed me that, man, having a nail driven into my eye would absolutely suck. I can't really imagine a single thing on earth that would ever be worth driving a nail into my eye or anyone else's eye. That the suffering incurred, that the pain and misery and hardship that would be endured having a nail pushed through my eyeball would be so bad that I can't think of a single motherfucking thing on this goddamn planet that I would say is worth it to be shoving nails into eyeballs. That's not intuition. It's a rational observation. And it's based on my personal knowledge having experienced it. Okay? That's all. It's experience that has informed me, not intuition. There was no, I got it from the spirits. I got it from the clouds. It just occurred to me. No, I personally had encounters with the object, the thing, and I drew rational conclusions about what it is.
Certain correctnesses and truths. But as to a principle, sharing an intuition is not the same as understanding.
Well, there we go. I don't share an intuition, so you're now straw man the fuck out of me, right? Because there's no shared intuition here. I don't have intuitions, so straw man, fuck you, motherfucking cunt. This is just such a grotesque straw man. You'll never find a video where I ever said anything about my intuitions. I've said exactly what you're going to say here, which is, yes, exactly. Intuition is not an argument. Intuition is not a piece of reason. Intuition is a useless pile of shit. And I've made arguments. Okay? It's saying exactly that. So this is a disgusting fucking goddamn straw man.
Understanding the root need for it.
Yeah, and I've gone through this root need. I've gone through this root value, okay? There's absolutely no alternative rational explanation than to say in and of itself, separated from all causes, all like it's Hitler's eyeball you're shoving the nail into, all irrational and mishy-mushy bullshit you want to strangulate around the circumstance. In and of itself, nail in eyeball is bad. Period. Okay? That's it. It's bad. If everything else is going to remain the same, and all you can do is extract a nail from going into an eye, it's always going to be a good idea. If nothing else is going to change except the fact that there's a nail in the damn eye and the thing that's got the eye is going to suffer, and there's nothing else that's going to change in the universe, that is in and of itself, there's no other possible thing you could do but pull that nail out. There's no other rational piece of logic you could apply, any other thought you could possibly have that could ever justify leaving the nail in if everything else in the universe is going to stay exactly the same. It's a goddamn fucking truth because of that fact that there is no alternative, reasonable explanation of what you do when nails are in eyes.
The root need for fairness. So,
now, in the video, I did a whole explanation of why fairness is needed, okay? It has no root need, okay? Because in the absolute sense, fairness is irrelevant. I said those exact words. In the absolute sense, fairness is irrelevant. The only way fairness means something is if you're going to have a game that continues. So if you have a moment, and it's going to last this long, fairness doesn't matter. So a deciding event, fairness doesn't matter. A concluding event, fairness doesn't matter. All that matters is what's the conclusion. What does the conclusion produce? But if you're going to have a enduring game with sentient beings who behave based on their rewards and punishment, now fairness is in play. So if you're going to have a game where people are going to play the game based on reward and punishment, you need fairness to make it known to people, to make it understood to people what it is they're playing with. Yeah. If the gambler's playing with somebody else's money, he's not going to feel the pain.
This is a difficult question. Firstly, the first one I'd like to shoot out there is I recall Michael Sandel in his Justice series.
Oh, who the fuck cares? I'm so sick of you just fucking name dropping over and over and over again.
At a particular point in the lecture series, the issue of consent in contracts, for example. And he has this phrase, and he says, what is the moral work of consent?
Yeah, well, whatever. In the context of this circumstance, we know the black and the white of it. We know you don't have it. Okay? We know there's no consent for the sperm and the egg and the fetus and the zygote and the birthing process. There's no survey says this is what the fetus says. Its opinion is being respected. No, we know there's absolutely no consent involved in this process of procreation. So there's little point in arguing about what's the no, there's no nuance here. There's no issues of incompetency or this a C or that's a C. This is overtly an act where somebody's doing something because of something in their head that tells them they sort of have some sort of reason to do it. And they're doing it, and it's going to affect somebody else directly. It just can't be any more overtly a crossing of the fence into the other person's territory and fucking around without consent.
And it's a really difficult question. It's really difficult to parse and understand. Not sure even I could answer it off the cuff.
Yeah, well, it's a silly notional collection of words. I mean, why even say it like that? What does that even? It doesn't even mean anything. As a question, it's like, what is the blueness of blue? I mean, it's a nothing question.
But I'd be interested in knowing what inmendham made of such a comment.
I don't make anything of it because we know consent is always situational. All right, it really is. It depends on what the importance of the thing that's getting consented to. Obviously, consent isn't so important when all you're worried about is whether you're going to give somebody a chocolate chip cookie or you're going to give them a blueberry pie cookie or something flavored. Yeah, I mean, when it's something irrelevant or almost meaningless, well, consent's not so fucking important. So all of a sudden, consent means something based on not only what you're doing to them, what's at jeopardy, what's put at risk by this consent agreement, and now we just go into the competency argument of what's their level of understanding of exactly what they've agreed to. But that's the two issues here, right? So we know the consent issue in this circumstance, again, is completely non-existent. There's no issue of incompetency. There's no issue of lack of informed consent or any of that other stuff. There's absolutely no consent. Period. No measure of it at all.
Maybe as I explore and I have in my mind's eye, I know where I want to go here. Maybe that will explain that concept, and I will finish by, if that's the case, and I think it will be, ending with some remarks on that question. What is the moral work of consent?
Yeah, again, what is the moral work? What does that even mean? What is the moral work? What does that even mean as a phrase? And then of consent. It just doesn't mean anything. Again, and related to this issue of consent, it has no meaning. Because we know the thing you're acting on has neither competence nor has it even been asked at all. No consent has been sent to it. It has been offered no opportunity to veto the action.
So consent, in terms of where does consent arise? Consent or issues of consent. in terms of contracts, um,
Yeah, and this is not a subject of contract. So again, what does this have to do with contracts? Absolutely nothing. What does this have to do? This has nothing to do with any kind of social value or social contract or any kind of anything like that, okay? Because there's obviously the individual you're acting on has not acquired anything like being 18 years of age and now being responsible for their judgment or any of that kind of stuff. None of that has happened. None of that exists in this circumstance. So this is a straw man waste of time. So now it's not even a straw man looking like my argument for the purpose of playing a game with my argument. Now you're on a completely different subject. Okay, consent for contracts among adult humans, competent humans, we're not even close to being anywhere close to that kind of an issue. This is clearly isn't about a contract among adults. It's clearly not a contract among equals or competence, so sufficiently equally competent. So there's no nothing here. This is just completely a subject of whether you are going to um, invest your judgment in somebody else's welfare.
is it enough to just say, to have the words that imply consent, or
There's no, again, where's the words that imply consent? What, the egg and the fetus, the egg and the sperm are mechanisms created by evolution. The individual created by their combination offers no consent. No microorganism consents to its existence, its creation. The creation process through the replicating molecule has extracted no consent from any of its victims.
how does the notion of informed consent, when is informed consent necessary?
Well, wouldn't it be an oxymoron to have any other kind of consent? Would there be any use in having ill-informed consent? So if your objective isn't to have fully informed consent, you already have a nothing consent. There's no point in having consent with an ill-informed or misinformed or fooled subject, is there? No, there isn't. Consent doesn't mean anything in that case, does it? No, it doesn't.
Perhaps medically, and as Foreman in the House series says, the idea of informed consent's crazy. I've got 8 years of medical training, and we're expected to give them informed consent. Maybe that's the truth.
I don't know. It's the truth for you. I certainly understand what informed consent is, and I certainly know that any opportunity is better than no opportunity. So it's like freedom or something. Okay, bigger if you're in jail, the bigger the cell, the better. Or the more running water you have, the better. The more clean something or other, the more So no matter what, even if you were going to say that you can never have this absolute amount of consent, this fully informed consent, clearly the objective is to have as much informedness as possible.
How about handling disparity in bargaining positions? How does that affect the consent question?
Well, again, this has nothing to do with the subjects that that we're on. So again, consent contracts are always situational. Clearly, extortion, like in bargaining for financial contracts through the capitalist empire system and all that shit, clearly it's extortion. The contracts are always by extortion. And so, yes, the consent is never free consent or liberal consent or honest consent. Let's just say that. It's not honest consent. Okay, it's consent out of desperation. Consent out of, I don't have a choice, do I?
When does it become an issue? When doesn't it become an issue?
Well, again, a completely different subject for which those all might be interesting subjects to go through all the 9 million different kinds of contracts that exist and the kind of consent that's applied. Do we really get legitimate consent from a 18-year-old to go into the military? I mean, do they really have the competence to be making a decision about becoming a mass murderer for money? Maybe not.
Endeavours in life. One might look to the virtue ethicist who says he can determine which endeavours are, let's say, virtuous and promotable.
Well, whatever. I mean, you're talking as if this is difficult to do. We can certainly know with the extremes. We can certainly know there's no virtue in, selfish motivation and brutal taking. So we can know that rape and molesting and lots of things we can put on the frickin' category of, well, that's a no-brainer, and that's a no-brainer, and that's a no-brainer as being non-virtuous acts. So, yeah, for most things, it's pretty easy to put it on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence. But yeah, play a game, pretend that this is complicated when it's not complicated.
And thus, if we're going to promote some endeavours at the expense of others, this would tie into consent issues. Maybe I don't think we ought to promote American football over swimming. People break their backs playing American football, but if a majority.
Yeah, I don't think we need either one. I don't think you need to give people the habit of either one. We eradicated, say, things like dog fighting and bullfighting in this country substantially. I mean, there's still some morons that play it, but I'm just saying we know that substantially, for most people, they live perfectly reasonable and fun lives without ever watching a bull get sworded to death, or watch two dogs fight, or watch two chickens rip their fucking beaks off. So yeah, we've found ways to live without these grotesquely inefficient and stupid entertainments, because there are other entertainments to take their place. Just like with vegetarianism, there's lots of other things to eat, like potato chips and Twinkies and whatnot, and you really don't need to be eating no animals.
Got in power and said, no, it's the most challenging endeavour of perfecting the human body, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, well, you're blah, 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 blahing again, which is evidence of happily ever after. Yeah, it all just sounds a little bit silly, doesn't it? So, yes, these justifications for silly things are silly justifications that, when analyzed under any kind of decent magnifier, any kind of decent, looked at with any kind of detail, you'll see that it's made out of shit. That the arguments defending this nonsense are just plain shit. And there is a truth here that there is preposterous inefficiency in some of the silly things we're subsidizing.
It involves speed, power, grace, intelligence. All this doesn't come to play in swimming.
Who cares about either one of them? Swimming's a waste of time and boring, and football is goddamn fucking stupid.
And thus, we're going to promote.
Yeah, well, look, you could promote turtle racing. You could promote a million different things, and all you have to do is turn it into a soap opera, and people will watch it, okay? So it really didn't matter whether it was horses that raced, or turtles that raced, or frogs that raced, or rats that raced. We know that it's not about what animals do in the racing. It's really just about humans investing in it. That's it. Emotionally. Okay? It's a soap opera. And whether you like Days of Our Lives or General Hospital or As the World Turns, yes, you have your favorite little soap opera, but that's all the fuck it is. Period. That's all the fuck it is.
Football, soccer, European soccer, this doesn't compare to American football, so we're going to let.
Yeah, As the World Turns is so much better than General Hospital, Right. That's all this is. Soap opera.
And funding for soccer and swimming is taking less precedence, and there could be a huge core popular, it could be 10% of the world or one.
Who cares? This has nothing to do with my subject. It has nothing to do with what I talked about in my video. So you critiqued my video because it lacked some sort of direction and content. And here you are talking about a subject that has absolutely nothing to do with my video. Nothing.
10% of the world, which still amounts to millions and millions of people who might not consent to such a direction in life. And of course,
well, that's like saying, mental patients or heroin addicts don't want to consent to rehabilitation or getting drug treatment. Because the patient doesn't want the cure, doesn't have too much to do with it. Criminals don't like being arrested. Does that mean that criminals shouldn't be arrested? I mean, the fact that people have psychologies that are inefficiently stupid should be pointed out. Whether they should be corrected or not is another subject, but we should at least point out, well, look, Freud will tell you, all right, you're just a silly person vicariously living through a drama, okay? You're addicted to a soap opera. You're a 49ers fan? Yeah, you're just addicted to a soap opera. You're a silly bitch.
I'm using an example of sporting endeavours, but there are lots of endeavours.
Again, lots of this, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you can go lots of blah, blah, blah. Just so, you won't have to, again, try to make it an articulate argument defending any of this crap. Yes, there's lots of silly, stupid endeavors. Most of them are just silly and stupid. People go into little rowboats and say, I'm going to row around the world. They go halfway up a mountain and it gets frozen to death and then expect us to pay $200,000 or $300,000 to go eradicate them from their dilemma. Yeah, people do a lot of stupid-ass, retarded shit. They tie ropes to their feet, jump off of bridges, and say, I'm cool. They jump out of airplanes for no good reason whatsoever. I mean, fuck them. If they want to waste their time doing that, fine. We're talking about an issue where what they're doing will mean that somebody else is put at risk. So again, find an activity that puts an innocent bystander just sitting in their living room at risk, and then talk to me about how their opinion matters. Their opinion doesn't matter. They're going to have a race car race on a public road. They're going to go to jail because it's not fair to the people that don't want to be killed by their stupid, idiotic fun.
That you could probably think of. Pet keeping, I don't know.
Yeah, well, now you're on the subject of obviously pet keeping would be an issue if you are capable of understanding that the pet is a victim, that the pet's welfare matters, and you're not one willing to concede that. So, you're sort of letting something seep in here somehow, that there's some legitimacy to this argument because these pets aren't just things. They are feeling creatures. And you're basically doing your activity on them. And if you're going to break their back, if you're going to do harm to them, you have to have a just cause, a just accomplishment to show for it.
Keeping your house tidy, or whatever.
Yeah, well, another idiotic, inane example. So you're gonna compare a video about the non-consensual imposition of something as serious as potential brain cancer, a life of horror as a ALS patient or something. You're gonna compare that to this trivial crap, keeping your house clean. You're going to say that these are the same subject. They're not the same subject. They're not close to the same subject. They're not in the same fucking goddamn country as subjects. You're not even on the opposite end of the earth as being distant from my subject with this nonsense. This nonsense has so little to do with what I'm talking about. You might as well be saying it from Alpha Centauri.
This whole, but the endorsement of an endeavour as virtuous by structural governance society is,
again, not the subject. Again, it's not about what society says. It's about what's logically can be demonstrated to be sensible or insensible as arguments. What's reasonable and what's unreasonable. What's a rational argument, what's an irrational argument. And you're not making a counter argument pointing out how it's somehow irrational to recognize that it's inappropriate to non-consensually act upon something else's welfare in a serious manner.
the subversion of consent in a way, because there may be many who disagree, and to what extent are they allowed to disagree?
Like again, but what the majority has said throughout history, who cares? Irrelevant to my conversation, irrelevant to the words I'm speaking, irrelevant to the quality of the logic. What's the point of this crap? The argument from popularity. That has absolutely nothing to do with the either subject or the absolute value that exists in the universe and demonstrating it through logical argument, or the subject of what can you do if you don't have consent? What level of confidence are you required to possess when you're going to act in a serious manner regarding somebody else's welfare? My argument is you have to have a high level of confidence that what you're doing is efficient, sufficiently efficient. I don't think people can justify a high level of confidence in saying they know that if they torture their child, it'll be worth it. That the little happy children make the little sad children all better. I don't think they can say that with sufficient confidence.
So this challenges, this brings in the idea of virtue.
Again, I don't think they can say it with sufficient confidence. So just remember that this consent argument goes with the word confidence. You have to have confidence if you're going to impose on somebody else.
On virtue ethicists, which I say utilitarianism in a way is just a kind of virtue ethicist.
Well, whatever. That's another pile of crap you just made up. But whatever. Virtue and utilitarian, the difference is one is judging the results, you're judging the intent. So again, intent really doesn't matter. The end game is the consequences. So, and again, if your intent is delusional, if your intent is I'm going to pretend nuclear power plants never melt down, and so I'm going to build one and I have a good feeling about it, right? You could say that's virtuous, like I want to give all the world free energy. But if you're going to do it by poisoning them, okay, it doesn't really matter what your intent was. What matters is what did you do?
It's the fact that they've stood up and said, no, the virtue is to count this. This is whatever they say, you know. The negative utilitarian.
It's not whatever they say. Again, the whole video is basically about defining what they say. So again, to sit there and say whatever. No, it's not in some whatever pile. It's not an innumerable pile of a billion things. No, it's pretty explicitly pointed out that there's two basic functions here, comfort and discomfort. And the whatever we're saying the discomfort is what you're paying out, okay, for the comfort in. All right, and the fact is you're not the only thing. Like again, you're not on an island planet. You don't live in a world where it's you and you alone who pay the price. No, the other things are in this comfort-discomfort equation. And so things where you're gaining comfort can be at their expense, and that has to be accounted for. But there is no huge pile of stuff here. It's really quite obvious. All right? It's not about stubbed toes, and it's not about ingrown hairs or crookedy fingernails. It's about real suffering, okay, and the value of the satisfied human ambition. And I think many fine arguments have been made pointing out that the ambition is made of a plastic, synthetic, cheap material, and the suffering is about as real and solid as you can get.
It says, oh, it's all an arithmetic of this fashion. The standard, you know, utilitarian says, no, we have pluses and minuses, and a plus can cancel out a negative. So, and if
yeah, well, that's not what we say. The only way you make a plus is to eliminate a negative. That's what we're arguing. So again, that doesn't even work. So, whatever this is, this doesn't have much to do with me either, considering I'm a negative utilitarian, not a utilitarian.
We have a couple more pluses. It doesn't matter that we have this negative, because it all balances out. And they're all assertions about the virtue of the counting system.
Yeah, the reliability of the statement that there is a universe of distance between warm cuddle and nail in eye. A universe of difference.
And I believe that I've seen through dialogue with inmendham that all utilitarianism's assertions, just like the virtue ethicist, comes from defining what ought to be the case.
Now, the first definition is defining the pluses and the minuses. Again, they're not defining the ought. They're just establishing the fact that here's a plus, here's minuses, then you do the math, and the math decides the ought. The ought is built out of the math. The ought isn't built out of the number itself. But intrinsically, yes, the negatives are by definition, they need resolution. They are, by definition, a problem. They are broken. They are a flaw. They are less than a perfect circumstance. They are, by every way of measuring, they are somehow known to be in a negative condition. They are, by their definition, by their existence, by their nature, by their very function, in the negative category. And the negative creates the ought.
And trying to impose that upon others.
Yeah, just the way you shoot rapists, don't you? Yeah, that's right. Okay, that's the ought. The ought is, yes, you stop the harm. Stopping harm is good. It's not any more complicated than that. So you can make it sound like somebody's taking away a liberty. You have no liberty to do harm. You have no right to take. You have no right to steal the candy from the baby. And if somebody stops you from stealing the candy from the baby, they're not a tyrant or a totalitarian force or a stealer of your rights. No, they're a defender of the baby's rights. Retard.
Now, within this sphere of fairness and consent of the way society goes, the ways which things are promoted, contracts, there are those who believe they have arguments for fundamental rights that are subvertible, that they are absolute, that
yeah, well, whatever. You can say that, and I would say that no, your responsibilities are the ones that are the absolutes. They're the ones that come first. So, this is a semantics argument to some extent, but again, it's whether you're arguing about the non-oppression, the non-building of the fence or the freedom thing. You're saying there's some freedom thing. I'm saying there is no freedom thing. There's just restriction. So, you can argue they have a right not to be restricted, but you don't have a right to do the same, to confine somebody else with your liberty. So your right, it's a Jefferson thing, right? Your rights end where somebody else's begin. So again, we're talking about the right of the things you didn't get consent from, the future, the next generation, the other individuals that you are causing to exist. You don't have their consent, therefore you must be certain of your act.
Rights ought to be granted, and that no, they are, as the Constitution or the American something or other, where I don't know what speech was it, where it's inalienable is the point. These rights are not something you can give up and say, oh, I agree to be slave for life to this man, or I agree to.
Well, it doesn't matter. You certainly could. So there's no, because they use broad language, flowery language, like somehow these rights are unassailable. Well, they are assailable. So, I mean, it doesn't really make much sense to use these words like somehow you cannot possibly violate them. Well, of course you can. That's why you need to write a document defending them, is because they are vulnerable.
Give up my rights to be treated fairly in court. These kind of things are inalienable rights, and I would be a person who would subscribe to that arena of ethics.
Yeah, well, whatever. That's fantasy talk in the first place. Again, they are not unassailable. This is a material universe. All this stuff is materially assailable. It's just silly to talk about this in those kind of with that kind of terminology. And certainly, again, your rights stop where other rights begin. So the subject is, what are your obligations in acting aggressively to impact other things? You're impacting other properties. If you just think about it as a fence around your property, if you just confined your behavior to what happens on your property, then there's no subject. But as soon as you start polluting the air, and as soon as you start stepping on this other ground, you have to take responsibility for those steps. Those steps have to not only have virtue in what your motives are, not only do your motives need to be fair, honorable, decent, to have any likelihood of being constructive, but you also have to be very talented and informed and competent in your stepping. You can't be reckless and sloppy as you bounce across their property, okay, with your bag of uranium.
That's core. Another arena of ethics is loyalty. If I would ask inmendham, what is your take on loyalty? And I would guess.
Yeah, this is just such. Why would I care? What does this have to do with the subject? Nothing. That loyalty is about this personal relationship you have with individual humans on planet fucking Earth. It doesn't have anything to do with the philosophical conversation about the origins and nature of what being alive is. This is a social contract thing. This is an emotional nuance thing, you might even say. But this doesn't have anything to do with my video.
And his response would be, loyalty is just for the bees, the birds and the bees or something.
No, again, why would it be that way? Why would I say something like that? What I'd say is loyalty is kind of another useless word. What is loyalty? Your first loyalty is honesty, right? So aren't you just really just saying, well, what? That's your first responsibility or something? Wouldn't that be the nature of loyalty? Is that you give somebody the truth of you, the truest piece of you or something? But that's about all I can make sense out of that word.
But I preempt his response here. But it occurred to me, and memory is a really perplexing thing for me, because I just don't know how I remember anything. You ask me what my favourite brand of sauce or how many brands of sauce there are, and I will not be able to recall very many. Probably it's a bad example, probably can, but
Yeah, bad example again. So more non-argument to go with the cliche philosophy, right? So it's just this philosophy by cliche. You know, I can't remember anything. How do I remember? You know, and they just pretend that that's a truth when obviously it's not a truth.
um, but these kind of things, and yet I remembered Inmendham in one of his videos talking about how he is more forgiving in terms of, he once said that he would fall out with people and have done with them and readily wash his hands of them. But he said that sometimes he had a history with people that made it worth not being so harsh, perhaps.
Oh. Yeah, really. So this is a complex circumstance. Somebody has in the past proven that they're not a complete asshole, and so therefore you don't just close the complete asshole door. And people who have never proven themselves to not be a complete asshole, and through every interaction you've had them demonstrated themselves to be assholes, yes, you take the more efficient judgment and say once an asshole, always an asshole. Where in the other case, the exception is, okay, this was an asshole that has been somehow grown. Mold has taken the person over for a while, and maybe they'll regain their senses. So yes, you would invest in the thing that has once worked, where you might not invest in the thing that never worked. So if you had two light switches and you flipped them 10 times, and one of them turned on twice, and then one of them didn't turn on ever, which one would you invest time in fixing first? The one that goes on twice or the one that never went on? Yeah, I think you know the answer.
I would say that's a kind of loyalty. And what he's saying is that, he said as much, that somebody, and I think was it the Nick fella? Is his name Nick? I forget his YouTube name for the minute, but relating to,
I guess that's the modern mystic. But whatever. This is just, and again, what does this have to do with the subject? Nothing. There's no point in talking about our emotional relationships with individuals and call that philosophy. That's psychology. I mean, it's an interesting subject, how we psychologically deal with these nuances of emotion and attachment and rejection and disappointment, but it just doesn't have anything to do with the philosophical subject of my fucking video.
This, that he felt he'd given some really good insights, and that made him worthy of not being castrated, or so to speak. So the question is, lots of people feel strongly about elements of loyalty. That loyalty.
Yeah, well, again, see, now more straw man, right? Because I would, if somebody cured cancer and they were a pedophile, I might cut them some slack because they cured fucking cancer. And the fact that I would do that doesn't mean I'm loyal. It just means that I'm recognizing a distinction between, oh yeah, useless pedophile and useful pedophile. Just a pragmatic recognition that, yeah, well, this one's pretty fucking useful.
Is a factor that it comes into play with deciding the fairness with which I treat you. That I have internally one set of rules for my family, one set of rules for my wider friends.
Right, and that's all emotional crap. I'm sorry, that has nothing to do with philosophy, has nothing to do with my video. Certainly we're emotionally susceptible to bigotry, but bigotry is not something to be honored or respected. So what's the point of having a conversation about it? It's just bigotry. I'm sorry. Nepotism is just bigotry. The child is not changed by who has it. The child's identity and value and meaning exist in the child. It has nothing to do with the property claim.
And family, another set of rules for my community, yet another set of rules for the country.
Well, as stated, I've called you a bigot in the past, and you're just saying, yeah, I'm a bigot. Fine. But that's all that is, okay? If the rules aren't based on cause, if there isn't a cause for them except your emotions, then that is just crap. It's bigotry. Nothing else.
And so on and so forth. I think at the base, at the root of this question, Inmendham and I would be in agreement that it's nothing more than a psychological delusion, or a practical force that presses us to behave in certain ways.
You call it practical. I'm basically saying exactly the opposite. There's nothing practical in it. It's invidious and insidious. It makes us into assholes and retards.
What I mean is if I don't exhibit this characteristic of giving loyalty, then I maybe have no friends and can gain no headway in my own life.
Well, I don't know if that's exactly true, but yeah, certainly people like lying to each other. They like playing each other for their utility. Most relationships between people are superficial in their function and caustic in their motivations. People befriend people because they have utility and all kinds of reasons, and there's very few people you could say sincerely or any real way maintain connections to people merely to value the person. They're valuing aesthetics. They're valuing how pretty they are. They're valuing how, like again, how good they make them feel. They're valuing something related to what's in it for me. And that's a sad fucking truth. It's a pitifully depressing, sad, pitiful truth of our function that we are so bigoted emotionally.
And people will shun me and so that being said, I wonder whether Inmendham would recall this himself and remember this notion of loyalty that he has.
Again, your words, not my words. Your mischaracterization of the causes and reasons why I behave the way I do towards people. I've explained again why. And yes, there's probably some element of psychology involved. And I've not made any argument that this means anything in any way whatsoever. I'm not using it as an example of anything. You're using it as an example of anything. You know, what my 8-year relationship with the modern mystic, or 7 years or whatever, has nothing to do with the subject of anything except my psychology and his psychology. We've done philosophy videos. The psychology of our personal, the fact that I live in his brain and he lives in my brain, doesn't have much to do with any subject we're talking about. So fuck you. This is just such a pile of shit.
And I think given that I think that we're probably like-minded on loyalty, it kind of makes myself and himself, in a way, in this manner,
Well, almost out of time, so I don't know when the thing's going to run out, so I'm just giving you a fair warning that it's going to run out soon.
Somewhat of a hypocrite insofar as it's a clear expression that I'm not always entirely what I would rationally call fair. That I'm going to be.
Yeah, and that's fine, right? Again, so why is this an argument? I've only said that 10 zillion times in videos. I'm a psychology. I'm an asshole. I've said these words. There, it should be over with. It has absolutely nothing to do with the video I made. The video I made wasn't about psychology. It was about evolution and consent and the fact that these are huge stumbling blocks to this optimistic, let's just keep playing the game bullshit. It just doesn't work logically based on the evidence of evolution and the evidence that if you're going to impose on somebody else, you have to impose with confidence. You have to make sure if you're going to give somebody a gift, you've got to be sure it's not a bomb or the plague or covered with cooties. That's your obligation. Okay, it's not a nothing. No, it's a something. It's an obla-fucking-gation.
Behave certain ways just because I feel the weight of life and living gives me the intuition that I ought to behave this way and cut this guy more slack than I do the other guy, so to speak.
Yeah, well, whatever. That's your way of thinking. That's not my way of thinking. It certainly hasn't been what I've said or what I've articulated in the argument, because I've been pretty upfront about the fact that this is a circumstance that I have that's emotionally complicated. This is not. And I've been clear about that, so fuck you again.
So I posed the question, what is the moral work of consent?
More the better. Okay, the more competence the better, the more informed the better, the more all of that the better. And if there's absolutely zero informed and absolutely zero consent given, then yes, you have to have more confidence. So the more informed your victim, the less you're responsible, where you have the burden of confidence. And the less informed and less consent you have from the victim, the more you have to be informed and confident. So that's the scale. They tip inversely. So the more competent and informed your victim, the lower your responsibility. The less informed they are, the less consent they give, the more confident you have to be, the more informed you have to be. You have to be goddamn right.
Consent relating to contracts, relating to how much, what makes consent. I guess that's part of the question of the moral.
No. This really isn't part of any of the question, right? We already established there is no consent. All right? We don't need to have a conversation about the consent because the consent has zero character. It has zero properties. It has nothing. It's a zero. It's a zilch. It's an empty fucking goose egg. All right? So we've already established that there is no consent given. You're imposing without consent. Period. There's no need for any further conversation except about why you're qualified to impose without consent.
What makes consent worthy? Is it informed consent? Is it consent where bargaining positions are of equality? How is it resolved?
Yeah. Again, there's no need to go through any of that nuance because we're nowhere near any kind of balance. We're not in some middle ground where half the consent's on them and half the consent's on you. We're at a complete tilt. Zero, you got the full burden. Full burden's on you. If you're going to act on somebody else's territory, it won't, and there is no consent at all. They have no knowledge of what you're doing, no knowledge, no opportunity to say fuck you. Then it's all on you to make sure your act is not a trespass.
is an inequality of bargaining power. I've talked about the idea of rights and how is this reflected in all this. The idea of virtue, that someone...
Again, rights to what? Rights to rape, right to use somebody else for your purposes, take risks with their welfare. These are not standardly defined rights, okay? It's not a standardly defined right that you have a right to take. It just isn't, right? Taking is not a right. Taking is a privilege you have to earn, okay, with competence of purpose and competence of ability. So until you have those things or can demonstrate those things, again, it's playing fucking God. Creating humans, creating sentient beings is nothing less than playing fucking God. And you essentially have to have whatever people have as a notion of God's competence to do it.
The idea of virtue really is a subversion upon the ideas of consent, I propose. And I've alluded that utilitarianism, from my point of view, is a form of virtue ethicism.
Well, these are, in my opinion, these are nonsensical, non sequitur connections of words, and it has nothing to do with the subject. Consent is a subject by itself, individual. It doesn't need any of this other crap tied to it. It's a simple principle. You either have something, you either do something with the without opposition, or you do something without knowledge. I mean, you either, you know what I'm saying, I mean, you either do something in an atmosphere where there's no reason not to, or you do something because you're not listening to the reason not to. You're not hearing the reason not to. You're not paying attention to the reason not to.
It's virtue ethicism being a prescription on the games we ought to play in life, and utilitarians saying that one of the games we ought to play is counting up these nuggets of utility.
Yeah, and fuck with your own junk. Fuck yourself. Play in quicksand yourself. Don't push somebody else into it. Don't use somebody else as a sidewalk to get to your fucking Walmart.
I've asked the question, for many people, loyalty, you know, do you tell? You know, this would be a big one for the Rizzle Dizzle, aka Snake Plisskeness. You know, he's about not telling tales, not grassing, blah blah blah. This would be a big thing for a lot of people.
I don't even know what that means.
I
don't know what that means in the context of his existence on the internet, which has just been, you know, open drama. You know, whatever. I mean, covert actions.
Missile from the big globule of furnace is the question.
False colors, all that kind of thing. So anyway, this has nothing to do with the subject, like I've said. So straw man, entire video is just a big